Alright guys, welcome to the squat series. This is the self-mobility, so you're doing all this to yourself. Today I'll just be covering mobility for the squat, not for everything, just specific to the squat. And after this video, of course, we'll do other ones on how to correct any immobilities or stiffnesses you might have. But we're going to go through stability and lots of other stuff as well. But this one's just self-mobility assessment. This is what I do to clients, a quick screen to make sure everything is mobile enough to squat well, which is number one of the table leg. If you're not mobile enough, you can't squat properly. So we start at the feet with your ankle mobility. Now the thing to note, if we just look at the feet, is when you're relaxed it doesn't matter, but when we're squatting we want to have active arch control and hold those arches up and not let them collapse. This is important because this is how we measure ankle mobility, and you'll see the difference. So I'll hold active arch and you've got to measure knee to the wall and keep your heel down. And you see how far away you can get just before that heel wants to lift. And that gap from here to here should be about 10 to 12 centimeters. And that's about my limit right there. But you'll see, if I collapse my arch, I can go way further. But that's not relative to the squat, because with the squat, we're always holding active arch. So that's a big point you have to do when you're measuring. So that's ankle, very simple. You want that 10 to 12 centimeter gap. The next is knees. Knees are the simplest things in the world for a squat. You have to have this straight knees and full flexion of your knee. If you've got that, your knees are mobile enough. Probably barring any injury concerns, never seen immobile knee for squatting. It's mainly at the hips. But the one thing we do check for the knee is that your IT band is relatively loose enough. So the way to check that is you lay on your side, pop this leg behind and let it drop down. And it should drop down so your foot is well below the level of the bench. If it's kind of just hovering up here, and make sure you're not rotating, you've got a tight ITB. But if it drops right down to below parallel, then your ITBs are probably loose enough. Then we get to the granddaddy of squats, your hips. Your hips have to be mobile. So, the first one to check with this is hip flexors. And it's a very, very simple test. You simply hold one knee to your chest and lay back and pull it in nice and tight. And then this bottom leg should just run parallel to your body. If it's stuck up here and you're relaxed and it can't go down, then your hip flexors are too tight. But it should just drop down and be at least parallel with your body. That's a quick way to check your hip flexors. The next one for your hips is just, this serves two functions, just to see if the hip has enough range to go to a below parallel squat. Also tells you the preferred position of your feet in relation to your hip anatomy somewhat, because everyone has different hip anatomy. This one's super simple as well. With your knees up, just pull your knee in and slowly rotate it out. And you'll feel a spot, a quadrant, where it feels really loose and you can get all this hip flexion. If I come up here, you see that it pulls itself a bit straighter. You don't have as much hip flexion. As I get to about there, boom, it drops right into the socket, and that's my preferred squat stance. If you can't pull into a nice position and it's always at 90 and can't get below, then you've probably got slightly tight hip capsules and you'll have to stretch them, which we'll cover in a different video. And finally, for the hips, we want to test the actual ball and socket anatomy to see if your hips are naturally turned out or naturally turned in. That tells us a lot to do with your, which we'll cover again in another video, your foot position in terms of turning out, turning in, so it's congruent with the anatomy of the ball and socket. But how do you test that? An easy one, you land to your stomach and you let your leg fall outwards. And as you can see, mine does not fall out very far. And then the second one is to let it fall in. What you don't want the body to twist, so keep the front of your hips down and then that's how much external rotation I have, and that's how much internal rotation. So you can see my hips are very externally rotated, hence I walk like a duck, but my natural toe position can point out a bit more. It's very natural for my hips to go that way. Other people can be very inverted at their hips and they need a bit of a straighter foot position. But knowing that is important for later on. So they're the main ones for your hips. You can see there's a lot to do with your hips. You want loose hip flexors, loose ITBs. You want to know that you have that hip flexion that goes into the squat range, and you need to know the anatomy of your hip. But get all those in place. The next place we really look at is your thoracic spine. You need decent thoracic extension to get the bar into a good position. If you're a bit stiff in your thoracic, you can end up in these poor positions, one which will tilt you forward in the squat, but more commonly than not cause a lot of shoulder injuries because of a stiff thoracic spine and being under load, and it puts you into internal rotation. So how do we check that? We just need a wall. Stand up straight against the wall. Start with your hands against the wall here. You want to try and keep your spine not flat, but you don't let it arch out. You just tuck the belly button in, tuck the chin in. So with belly button in, chin in, so the head always stays in contact. And you should be able to keep your arms in contact all the way to the top. And you can see, mine come off a little bit. I have not been training that much during COVID. So you can see I've gotten a lot more time in front of the computer. I'm actually a bit stiff in my thoracic, so getting back into serious training, I would focus on stretching my thoracic spine. But that's a nice easy test for that one. And finally, we want to have enough external rotation at the shoulder. Because when you're under the bar, you want it to be easily able to get into some external rotation to keep those elbows in a nice place. If you're tight into internal rotation and they're stuck back here, that's a bit of a poor position for squatting. And if you're forcing it under, again, you can cause a lot of shoulder irritation and medial elbow issues because of a lack of external rotation for the squat. And an easy test for that, I just take the broomstick, you do a backhand grip, put it right where the shoulder joint goes. Again, keep your tummy in, standing up straight, tummy in, shoulders back, and you should get into a good amount, at least 45 to about 60 degrees of external rotation. If you're stuck up here and it won't go any further, and the only way you can go further, is to bend your back, then you're a bit stiff into external rotation. So that's nearly all of it, head to toe. So you can just see, but doing it to yourself literally it can only take 2 to 3 minutes. Ankles, knees, longest time spent at the hips. Make sure your thoracic has good extension. Make sure you've got good external rotation in the shoulders. And the last one I do with most people, and it's quite a missed one, is we check for neural length. So an easy one for this is just the simple straight leg raise. Nerves are very much part of the anatomy. A lot of people don't really think of them, but they're like brake cables. So you have a sheath and then the nerve slides through the sheath. And if it gets restricted anywhere, it can impede mobility in a lot of sports, especially powerlifting as well, when there's a lot of muscle surrounding the nerve sheath. So this one is really easy. Just grab a band or whatever. Lay dead flat. Toes must be back. Knee has to be dead straight. And you want to at least get to 60 degrees. So I'm probably at about 60 to 70 there. If you're stuck down here, mobility-wise, and you feel it burning into your calf or pulling through your hamstrings, then you have to work on your neural mobility. We want at least 60 degrees in this straight leg position. So go ahead and test yourselves. See if you're lacking in any of those mobility areas, because the next video I will show you how to correct each of those mobility issues if you have one. So I shall see you at the next video. Ciao.